everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. So, I'm coming to this episode today a bit brokenhearted. I mean, what else is new? But very specifically, news came out yesterday that a body of a woman was found in Daura, just outside of Beirut, and she was identified as a Syrian trans woman who went by the name Tala. And the news has just really fucked with me. On top of everything else that's happening in the context of obviously the genocide in Gaza, but more specifically to this situation, the rampant transphobia and queerphobia in Lebanon and across the region, and also the mobilization against Syrians. And so Syrian trans women and trans men really are in a really fucked situation, and they have very little support in Lebanon. And yeah, it just fucks with me. And I posted about it, and the amount of transphobia I get in the comments, the amount of just like, I don't know, and the mixture of racism and transphobia, it's really fucked up. And so this is where I'm at right now. Again, on top of everything else. The main topic of this episode, I did bring up a bit in my last episode about Lebanese fascism, and specifically Christian fascism in Lebanon. I'm going to go a bit more into depth, and I'm going to broaden it out from just these petty militias and the political parties that they represent, to also just a large contingent of Lebanese posters, of Lebanese people online, of not insignificant accounts online that talk a lot of shit. And a lot of these were in my comments the last few days, not just against this post about Tala, but also about some of my posts about the persecution of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. So I obviously have started this episode on quite a confrontational note in terms of the name of the episode. And honestly, I think it's not an exaggeration. Calling out the behavior of right-wing, let's just say fascist, Christian ideologies in Lebanon and comparing them to Zionist ideologies is not an exaggeration. You know, like 30, 40 years ago, they were quite explicit about this. And here I am talking about the political parties, but like Saeed Ael, who was a Lebanese poet, was very fucking explicit about his admiration for the Israeli army while they were besieging Beirut. You know, his hatred of Arabs, his hatred of Palestinians, exceeded reality to the point that it just became, what did they call philo-Zionism? Ziophili, whatever, like super intensely standing the Zionist state and their genocidal army. Anyway, so what's been happening lately in Lebanon is honestly something that's incredibly fucking concerning, and I think is something more people need to be talking about because it's a pattern, and it's a pattern that involves so many countries throughout the region, which is that Lebanon is just becoming a kind of offshore detention center, like a massive detention center for Europe, right? And so just last week or 2 weeks ago, Ursula whatever gave the Lebanese regime, the Lebanese state, $1 billion to do what? To prevent migration. Even though they've been abusing Syrians, abusing the entire population, but like disproportionately Syrians. And same with Egypt, and same with Sudan. The RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, formerly known as the Janjaweed, who have been committing atrocious crimes on the daily in Sudan, have for a very long time been supported by Europe because they control flows of migration, they control ports, they control routes and whatever, alongside obviously the support they get from the Emirates, but that's a different story. And so, okay, what am I talking here when I say that there are certain types of Lebanese people who are jealous of Israelis, right? If you look online, if you look at the discourse that's been manifesting over the last 5-6 years, right? So there's a discursive element, but then there is also a very strong attachment to political power. Because I'm not just talking about some accounts here or there, but it is very intensely directed like to some of the most powerful people in the country. Your Jabron Basils, your Hassan Nasrallah. So, okay, I'm going to have to break this down a little bit because that's quite an accusation. But it's backed by a lot of historical fact, by a lot of like really intense similarities in ideology and discourse and behaviors. But it is also like very intensely connected to political power, right? Like how people in power in Lebanon, how our quote unquote leaders talk about Syrians, used to talk about Palestinians, right? And so, okay, I'll start with the first one. There is this idea in Lebanon, which is kind of older than the Lebanese state itself, which is Phoenicianism, right? People in Lebanon, certain groups, specifically, and I don't want to get very sectarian, even though it is very sectarian, but it is very popular amongst Maronite Christians, right, who make up like a good chunk of the population. This is not a Christians in the Orient oppressed minority. Like they are, as a sect, as a political whatever, like some of the most powerful, wealthy, whatever. Again, not going to get too much into it because, or rather get into the sectarian aspects of it because it can get very problematic very quickly. But suffice to say, Maronite Christian political parties and political thought has, for a very long time in Lebanon, revolved around this idea of Phoenicianism, which is a deflection from this idea of Arabism. We are not Arab. We are Phoenician. We are better, right, than these disgusting Arab Muslims, whatever. Many of them genuinely believe that they are long-lost Europeans, that the Phoenicians are the birthplace of Western civilization in some ways. Like there is a supremacy to this idea, like not just that we are distinct, but we are the best. And we created language or the first alphabet, which all sounds hunky-dory. But when manifest into a political national identity and movement, it necessitates exclusion and essentially sort of genocidal thought, essentially. Because when they say we want to secede, right, Phoenicians online really talk a lot about this idea of creating, of like seceding from Lebanon, of becoming their own little country. And what kind of country does this look like? An ethno-state for the Maronite Christians, right? And that's fucked up. And they talk all the time about, yeah, creating this little thing and pushing all the other people out. And that's exactly what the Israelis talk about all the time. It's just the only difference is that the Israelis have the weapons, have the support to do that type of horrible fucking ethnic cleansing. And have had for decades, you know what I mean? And so Phoenicians for the longest time have always been animus, like against, not just Arabs in Lebanon and trying to identify ourselves as whatever, but the political movements of pan-Arabism or whatever, which obviously are very problematic, and I do not subscribe to them, and have for the very long time appealed to the West. You know, these Phoenicianists, these political parties are very heavily tied to France and have been for like decades. In fact, even centuries, but not going to get into that. And during the Civil War, these Phoenician political parties, Phoenicianite, let's call them, such as the Kataib, the Lebanese forces, were literally allied with the Israelis, right? This is documented. They would train in Israel. When the Israelis besieged, they kind of besieged Beirut on invitation. I mean, they didn't need an invitation, but one of the things they did soon after they invaded was to elect or enable the election of Bashir Gemayel as the president of Lebanon, right? I know I get really deep into politics or like history every time I talk about this. It's just genuinely, most Lebanese do not fully understand this history because it's not taught to us and it's very obfuscated. It's not in the education system because the political parties, the state cannot agree on a history, and it always, doesn't want to create civil tensions by saying that it was Maronite Christian political parties that started the Civil War, or that this, they committed this massacre or they did this. And so, yeah, I feel the necessity to be very clear about the history here and to go into depth. But anyway, at a political level, there is a lot of affiliation between this idea of Phoenicianism and Zionism, like quite literally. The only two books I have ever found on Phoenicianism as a kind of political movement are written by two Israeli historians, right? I don't know why that is exactly, but it's very clear when you read them that it's like, aha, those are our people over there. So, why am I bringing this up now? And why am I coming at this with such a sort of like fighting intention? Because there are pogroms happening in Lebanon against Syrian refugees. There are calls for Syrians en masse to be deported from Lebanon. And the state is part of this. The army is contributing to this. The media, the mainstream media, all of which, every individual one, is attached to a political party or to a rich fucking billionaire like El Jadid. And so when you post on it online and you say, this is bad, if we are to send, deport, repatriate, whatever you want to call it, Syrians back to Syria, they will be killed. This is the reality. Deporting Syrians from Lebanon to regime-held areas in Syria is a death sentence. And so many people who advocate for these things constantly avoid that and create these kind of like false narratives of, oh, the war is over, it's safe over there, to avoid actually saying what they are saying, which is, we want them to go and die over there. We don't care if they die as long as they're just not here, which is just super dishonest and super fucked up. Like, if you want to kill Syrians en masse, just fucking say it. And it's just one of these situations where it's like these fascists hide behind this kind of liberal language or this kind of just, oh, we don't have the infrastructure, it's whatever. But we have already seen cases of people being deported and being killed, right? We have already seen cases of people in Lebanon willing to kill themselves instead of being deported because they know, Syrians themselves know more than anyone, what will happen to them if they are sent back. They will either be killed, be conscripted into the same genocidal army that forced them into refuge and has kept them out of the country for over a decade, or they will be imprisoned and tortured and still killed. So it's fucked up when I'm online and just saying something that I feel like is just so basic, which is like, I'm not saying that everything's fucking fine, because Lebanon is in a state of perpetual economic and political and honestly social collapse. But this has nothing to do with the Syrian refugee. This has everything to do with the oligarchical, neoliberal, bullshit sectarian regime that we have in Lebanon, right? Some of whom are literally complicit in the war in Syria, right? That has forced Syrians to come to Lebanon, right? I don't need to name who that is. I think it's pretty obvious. So it's this fucked up situation where Syrians can't leave through the sea to Europe. They can't go back home, and they're stuck in this limbo, which is like a torturous hell. Again, in my last episode, the reason that I brought it up, the reason that I'm talking about this and I can't stop talking about it, is because there are literally gangs of Lebanese men roaming the streets, calling for Syrians to leave or be killed, These are lynch mobs. Some of them have found Syrians and just beat them up, And it's just this sort of indiscriminate, some people where it's like their Arabic is a bit whatever, they have an accent, but they're Lebanese and they still get beaten up. Or someone looks a bit queer. Again, the reason I bring up at the very beginning as well, not just because my heart is fucking breaking at the moment because of what happened to Tala yesterday and this... Sorry, I'm going to slow down a little bit. But there is a confluence, there is a connection between the mobilization against queer people and Syrians, and it's very explicit. But that's not what I'm talking about here today. Again, I'm going to return to why am I saying that there are certain types of Lebanese who are jealous of Israelis? Because if you look at the language, and you look at the history, and you look at some of these people's profiles, some of them literally have the Lebanese flag with the Israeli flag. And if not, they have pictures of Bashir Jmeil. A lot of these people in my comments have pictures of Bashir Jmeil, which is not just a red flag, but is super fucked up. And it's just like, I just block them because that's not really someone I want to talk to. And Bashir Jmeil was never president. He was killed a few weeks after he was elected, before he was even inaugurated. And this is back in 1982. But his spirit lives on in these people. They talk about him all the time. They have sort of like slogans of it, like he still lives in with us. One of the largest squares in Beirut, Sassin, there's a huge poster of him draped over a building. And this is a person whose political party committed the Sabra Shatila massacre. This is a person who collaborated with the Zionists. This is a person who super fucked up. And I'm not saying any political party is great, but it's just no one to be venerated. He is not anyone to be venerated. And so when someone comments on something I've written where I'm like, maybe we shouldn't be deporting Syrians en masse and killing them, maybe there's another way. Maybe we actually return to some ideas of overthrowing this regime, because ultimately, if we don't do that, then we're all dead. Then we're all fucked. This is exactly what our regime wants. For people to be mobilizing, and otherwise, again, big reason, most people are silent. I'm really startled by the moral apathy. I mean, here I'm sort of channeling James Baldwin, I guess. But the silence of a lot of people in Lebanon, some of whom are very vocal about Palestine. And I don't want to compare the two, because obviously what is happening in Gaza is like some of the most horrific things that are humanly possible, and genocide at like an accelerated level. But here we have a situation at home, with people who have no support, who are completely marginalized, who are facing the brunt of state violence, of militia violence, and also violence of their own state. I don't know. It's just really upsetting, and I think more people do need to talk about this. And this is something that if we let it slide, it is going to haunt us. It is already haunting us. I said in my last episode that honestly, the very image of Lebanon is changing, because a lot of these people who are in my comments are not just obscure bullshit posters, but their ideas are fully manifesting at the local level, And so I think why I say they're jealous is because they want to be able to enact the kind of violence that the Israelis commit, right? That there's almost like a fetishization of committing massacres and pogroms, and of this supremacy and this idea of we have a larger right and a larger claim than those people. And it's either us or them. And they are wiping out our existence, and so therefore we need to kill them all, or remove them, or push them somewhere else. Like, so much of the language and the propositions and the policies are just exactly the same. They sound exactly the same. And the violence and the dehumanization and all of it is just, the only difference is the capacity. That a lot of these people that are posting, in Lebanon, we're pretty fucked up. We don't really have much money. We don't really have much support. We don't really have much whatever compared to the average Israeli, who are like fucking armed to the teeth, and who have the backing of the entire, not the entire world, but you know what I mean, the states of the world, and especially the Western world. And that's really fucked up. That's really fucked up. I do believe these people are a minority in Lebanon, but their desires, their ideologies are manifesting quite intensely, and there is not that strong opposition that needs to exist in order to prevent it from really causing intense, incredible harm, and then becoming its own structure that then we have to reckon with. I don't have any solutions. I definitely know that deporting Syrians en masse is not one of them. It does not solve any of the problems that we put on the Syrians' backs. When we say that the crisis is because of them, no, it's not. When we say, they're causing so much crime and theft, no, they're not. Like, it's just, there is no statistics to prove that. And even though there are other methods of, I don't know, you know what I mean? Than just, all of them are criminals, so all of them must be sent to their death. Like, even if Syrians commit crimes, how does that at all justify this mass mobilization and dehumanization of an entire population, of 1 million people? Lebanon can't handle it. Lebanon can't handle our regime. Lebanon can't handle the Israelis. Lebanon can't handle like European complicity in our regimes and the propping up of our state. I don't know. There is just a kind of thing of, this is a target that we can target, that we can actually affect. Like, Lebanese are incredibly powerless, right? In many ways. We are incredibly disempowered as a people, as a community, as a nation. And so it's a real disgusting thing when people kind of want to exert their power just because they can. And the only people they can exert their power on are migrant workers, are queer folk, are Syrian refugees, formerly Palestinian refugees. Well, still Palestinian refugees, but like it's just not as central in the discourse. And that's fucked up. Like, what do we really gain? I really don't understand, except for some feeling of power, some feeling of ownership of the current moment. That, like, I want something that I say to be enacted, and the only thing that I can say that can be enacted is violence onto a more marginalized group. That's a fucked up logic. Like, otherwise, I really don't see any other reason why, like, this is me maybe going a bit too psychoanalytic, but I really don't see any other reason, because we cannot benefit economically or politically or socially or security-wise at all. Like, why deport them? I don't know. I am really stuck thinking about these things because the current moment necessitates such intense thinking and action. And as I've been very honest in this podcast over the last few months, part of my dilemma, part of my depression, and part of my kind of feelings of uselessness is that, if I were in Lebanon and like when I go to visit or whatever, I don't think I'm going to be able to stand in the way of some of these militias. You know what I mean? Like, the things that I know that need to happen, like, I know I don't have the bodily and spiritual, whatever, strength and capacity to do those things. And so I'm left in this kind of state wherein all I can really do is post online or maybe do this podcast and raise awareness and kind of, I don't know, keep talking about it. But otherwise, the kind of discussion about tactics and what to do to stop this, I know there are small groups kind of underground talking about it, but I feel like it needs to be so much bigger. And otherwise, we're fucked. I mean, we're fucked anyway. No. Actually, no. I'm not going to end this on a nihilistic point. I think there are many things that we have created, that humans have created, and so therefore we can uncreate. The world does not have to be this way, and it can be different. I don't think the violence that's going to happen to Syrians is inevitable. I don't think anything about the Israeli state is inevitable, or the genocide, or of climate collapse. All these collapses happening, I don't think any of it is inevitable, and this is a kind of, I guess, a radical hope, because otherwise it's just doom and gloom, and I can't stand it. And especially as a Lebanese person talking about these things, where I'm not going to be the primary victim of, I can't fall into nihilism, and I refuse it. So, with all that said, I really hope you appreciate this episode. If you like this podcast, there is a tip jar in the comments below, and you can like and subscribe and whatever. Rating this podcast actually really helps boost it in the algorithm, rating it and leaving reviews. So again, if you want to support this podcast but are unable to do so financially, leave a rating, leave a review. I greatly appreciate it. And yeah, hope to see you all next week.